8:35.
तुम लोग यानी देख लेना, I'll try and
ठीक
keep
है.
it. ठीक है ना?
Hi, Shoaib,
Usman,
go.
tell us a bit about yourself and why you chose cricket writing as a profession.
I I think it was I started writing actually quite late. I got into it because there were people in my family who were writing, and I was at a stage in my life where I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and writing seemed like I think like documentary filmmaking and stuff. Now the writing seemed like a fairly easy thing to get into. And so I started writing, and cricket was one thing I knew. Obviously, I started writing on cricket, and that was basically how it started. It started very late. I wasn't writing from in my teens or anything. I started writing, I think, when I was 25 or something. Basically, started writing seriously when I was 22 or something.
And it was always
But when
Pakistan.
you say, sorry, go
Was it
on, Shoaib.
always Pakistan cricket that you had in mind?
Yeah, initially, yeah. Initially, because it was what I knew the best. I mean, obviously I'd watched a lot of cricket, but it was always, Pakistan playing against somebody, and I grew up watching, guys like basically Wasim and all. Wasim Akram has probably informed most of my kind of growing up years generally. So it was mostly Pakistan, and I got lucky when I came to Pakistan in 2002. I wrote just like randomly. I was looking around for things to do. I happened to find an email for Wisden, the magazine in England, and I wrote to Tim Delisle, who was the editor of the magazine, and they wrote back, which is amazing. He wrote back saying that we don't have anything, but you should get in touch with Sambit, who was the editor of the Wisden Asia magazine at the time. And Samit Bal again wrote back and said, why don't you, we were looking for stuff from Pakistan, why don't you do something? And the first thing he told me to do was to get an interview with Rashid Latif, if it was possible, after the 2003 World Cup when he became captain. And I somehow managed to get his number. I called him and he said, do you smoke cigarettes? And I said, yes. And he said, well, why don't you come over now? We'll smoke a few cigarettes and you can interview me. And that was kind of how it started.
Off the
Acha,
record, we are talking about normal cigarettes here.
Yes.
Sounds very suspicious, but so this is you wrote to क्या कहते हैं for Wisden in 2003, and then you were covering the India tour in 2004. What was the journey between that time?
So I wrote for with Cricinfo. I started writing. I think one of the first pieces I wrote for their site was a Moin Khan century on the New Zealand tour in 2003, early 2003. And I stayed up all night. I don't know why. I think I was ill, so I stayed up at night watching the innings. And it was a typical kind of Moin 100, And I wrote a piece on it, sent it to the site, and they published it. And Sambit got in touch a few days later. I'd been doing stuff for the magazine, and Sambit said, listen, why don't you start writing more regularly for the website? We need stuff always from there. They gave me like a small retainer, said, write for us. And so I was doing that and working at Dawn at the same time. And then the India tour came up, and I just thought, that is something that I want to kind of cover. So I took time off from work. Dawn was very good, they gave me time off. And I covered it essentially as a freelancer, but with a retainer for Cricinfo. So Cricinfo, gave me regular work. I had that. I was lucky with that. And in the meantime, between then and between the India tour, I think I would probably write like 2 or 3 pieces a month. And, nobody wrote about Pakistan's domestic cricket really at that time. And I was doing like weird columns that nobody would ever read on Habib Bank qualifying for the second round of a Qaeda-Azam trophy, even though they had lost every match in the first round. Stuff like that, which nobody was reading, but, it got me in touch with people. I was able to build up contacts within cricket that way.
Acha, why did you pick the name The Unquiet Ones?
Okay, so it's not a big secret, but it wasn't actually picked by me. It was picked by a friend of mine who's in the publishing business, a very good friend of mine. In fact, it's Rahul Bhattacharya's wife, Shruti Devi. Rahul is an old friend, great Indian writer. Is an old friend, and his wife Shruti is in the publishing business, and she has been, both of them have been big influences on the book just throughout. And so the title was the very last thing. I hadn't come up with anything suitable throughout the last like 4 or 5 years. I just couldn't think of anything. So Shruti read the final version that I sent to her a while back, and she came up with 2 names. And I've forgotten the other ones. No, the other one was, I think it was a phrase from the book called A Strange Kind of Love. She suggested that. But then she suggested the Unquiet Ones, and I think like from the moment I heard it, and she's plugged in like Rahul because she's married to Rahul. I think she's plugged in fully to how Pakistan is and Pakistan, the cricket team. And the Unquiet Ones just made so much sense to her. And I just heard it and I was like, that's great. I wasn't fully 100% sure exactly what it meant at the time, but it just sounded so right that it had to be done. So it wasn't me at all. It was her. And it's a great, great pick. Like I just think it's perfect.
Okay, so going with the book, you've written about how you, or I guess you spoke about it, how you changed the format to its current form a few years into the process. And the format itself, if you could talk a little bit about it, because as a choice, probably in terms of getting everything on the same page is an excellent choice. It's also a controversial one because there's a lot of big names that end up missing out because of it or events. So how long did you wrestle with that format, and why did you make that decision?
Like the shape that it's so now, just for people who are listening, the format, the way it is now is that I've divided the whole history into 5 sections. There's the arrival, the regression, and so on. So five kind of different ages of Pakistan cricket, and each one opens with a match or a series that I feel is definitive of that era. And the various threads that are in that match, then kind of spread out into little essays of that era. So, in the 60s, there's stuff about how Pakistan changed from matting wickets to turf wickets. And then there's profiles of like who I thought were the key players in each section. So that structure came to me, I think, I figured, again, with the help of Rahul, in fact, particularly, and Shruti, that structure, I think, was decided in 2011. Which is 4 years after the book had been commissioned, and after I had done, I would say at least 60% of the writing I'd done by then, and it was a mess. A lot of the stuff that you read in there now was still there, but it was in a different format. So the media was one whole essay on its own. The what happens to Bangladesh and Balochistan, instead of being sprinkled out over 2 sections, as was the media as well, was one essay in itself. And so the format just wasn't sitting. It was historical narrative, but then there were also essays in it. So when I sent it to them, they kind of, Rahul in fact suggested that there was so much off the field happening in the book that he felt that a good way of getting more cricket in would be to like focus on maybe recreate one match at the start of the book, which was the Oval Test. But then I thought that might actually make sense for the rest of the sections. And it just happened to be, it worked out nicely that each era has its kind of one match that you can say to be a defining match or a tournament from that, or a series from that era. And then you draw stuff from it. So yeah, that structure was the biggest, I think, even more than like getting the research done, that structure was the biggest thing that I had to wrestle with to get that right. And then once that got itself right, then it kind of becomes there's a self-justifying logic to it. Then it's up to me. I decide who, and I knew like leaving out, major profiles of maybe someone like Waqar, not doing a major profile of any individual player in the 70s section. Yeah, these are, people will argue about that. People will say, somebody I'm sure, maybe Nadeem Farooq Paracha will say that, why is it Wasim Raja in there? Somebody will say, why is Majid Khan not in there? Why is Waqar not in there? Why is Inzi not in there? Like as a profile by itself. Yeah, and I can probably understand every one of those points, but at some point you have to kind of say, okay, I have to whittle it down to what I feel are the most representative people of that time, not just for their cricket, but also for their off-field kind of impact. And then you go with that. It's a history that you write, and while it's true, the aim is for it to be factual and true. By its nature, I think you kind of pick and choose what you put in there, basically.
Acha, Amar, can you mute your mic after you've asked the question?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay. And so, I mean, I haven't read the book entirely at all. I'm still in the beginning phases. But the feeling I'm getting is, you're telling as much a history of Pakistan than just like Pakistan cricket. So is that intentional? And did you think that from the start, ke shuru se hi, it's going to be about Pakistan as much as about the cricket?
Yeah, that it's kind of natural. That's the only way to do it because we like up sub dekhen cricket doesn't nothing in any country in any environment develops outside of its environment, right? You can't kind of take music in Pakistan develops because of the environment it's in. Art develops the same way. Writing develops the same way because of the circumstances around it. So cricket obviously was shaped by the way the country was changing, and so I didn't really strive to say कि अच्छा PIA पे भी कुछ लिखना पड़ेगा, but because PIA had such a role in cricket, I had to write more about PIA itself as well. For example, as one example, then guys like Peer Fagara, Abdul Dyer, who I had never heard of Abdul Dyer before my life, and he's this great character who's very much a part of Pakistan's history, not just cricket history, but Pakistan's history. So these things, and I'm glad it came out that there's a little bit about Pakistan in there as well, but this context had to be kind of given because that is how the cricket developed, right? It developed in that environment, and you have to kind of explain uh, the history of that environment as well. So I kind of knew it was going to happen, but I didn't force it to happen that way. It just kind of happened very naturally, and I think to have not done it that way would have felt very unnatural and kind of awkward if you write about someone like Noor Khan without explaining what a great guy he was and what he did in other places. Then kind of Noor Khan is just this paper figure who is just like, yeah, he came into cricket and did this and did that and then went away. That doesn't work that way. So yeah, it was like a natural process pretty much from the start.
Okay, so this is obviously something that comes in while you're talking when you're writing a history of Pakistan cricket. But the way you were approaching sports writing, um, right when you started, and you were part of a sort of generation of cricket writers who were very distinct from a large majority of their predecessors, particularly in how the match report was being written, which used to be a far drier sort of approach. And then with Crick Info and quite a few writers, Dilip Bogya, yourself, and Sidvi, and a few others. So that change and that approach towards writing about cricket differently, and so that's something that predates this book, but is very relevant to it. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about, influences or inspirations?
Uh, it's difficult. I think sometimes who my biggest influences were in terms of writing. I honestly can't pick anyone. I think working with guys like Rahul and Sid and Dilip at that time, and Sharda and stuff. These guys had an impact. I think because not like uh, not like you want to write like them, but because they're around you and it's the language that you guys speak in and the things that you talk about, that kind of filters its way into your writing. And I think I don't know. It's difficult, right? Because it just felt natural to me. So I love music. I love other things. I love Karachi. I love things about Karachi. So if these kind of references find their way into my writing, I think it's just a natural thing. It's not that cricket writing had once been dry or whatever. And I think the one other big factor was that Sambit at Crick Info was such an influence in the sense that he never directed you into any kind of space for writing. He was always there as a really kind of guiding hand at the top, uh, and he was very open. So you could go in many directions with him. I've worked on stories with him when he used to be less busy. He's very busy now, but he used to work hands on a big story with you. From telling you, what kind of questions to ask a guy that you're interviewing for the story. And when it came to writing style, he let you be. He would give you an idea of a structure of a story and where it should go. But writing style, he completely let you be, and he was unafraid. He, in fact, almost in some kind of invisible, latent way, I think he encouraged it because encouraged you to be as broad as possible. Because I think of the people he collected, guys like Rahul, me, Anand Vasu was a big guy at that time as well with Crick Info, Dilip, Sid. I think everyone had a kind of natural interest outside of cricket as well, and people were young, so they were seeing things and they were traveling and things were happening around them. I think it just naturally the milieu that we were in, it just became that way. And I don't want to intellectualize it or think about it too much. It's just it's a random group of guys who came together and started writing. But I think the environment of being around these guys really, to me, it was an eye opener as a young Pakistani guy meeting Indians for the first time on a prolonged basis, and the kind of stuff that they were doing, I was blown over by, because young Indian writers working for this company that was based in India, and they had traveled the world, they had met all these great cricketers, and I was just starting up. It was a real complete like eye opener, and I had to like kind of move to that level very, very quickly. Otherwise, you'd just be left behind.
Okay, so like a very distinctive feature of your writing was sort of developing this idea of Pakistan beyond the mercurialness. Like, I mean, so just a Hal Wala, the really famous article which is written, is not all of Pakistan cricket, but it has a very specific idea of Pakistan cricket. And the Unquiet Ones, by that's why it was such a good title as well, is it captures that. Um, but I felt, for example, Section 5 is 21 years long.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and Usme perhaps, and this is my view, again, the history is subjective. Like I feel that perhaps maybe the last 10 years form a distinct era, and perhaps for somebody like me who grew up in the Wasim and absolute maximum unquiet era.
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
make sense of how would you make sense of this era? Because in terms of the book, you've discussed specifically the biggest scandals, and Wasim sort of is the earlier part of that decade.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just for the sake of like discussion, like how do the last 10 years fit into your vision of Pakistani
It's
cricket as
interesting.
unquiet?
I also saw that last section, and initially when I started writing, it was always going to be the most hardest, the most difficult section, because it's the most recent. It's not ended completely. It's still ongoing, and I actually thought that I would divide it up into two sections. I felt that maybe that last section was actually two sections on its own. 92 to 99 was one distinct kind of era, and 99 onwards was one distinct. But then I think to kind of make it easier also on myself on writing it, I felt that the broader story, even now, since 92, has been one of a kind of decline, a very haphazard, but essentially a kind of decline. And the World Cup was, still the highest point, I think, that Pakistan has kind of reached. That whole era around the World Cup, 90, even stretching out to like 94, 95, because, it's not specifically limited to, each section is not specific, कि ये 82 से 92 ही तक सिर्फ है, around that area. So, I felt for ease of kind of making sense of this very recent history, it had to be treated as one. And once I made that decision, then, and I really struggled with kind of putting, the Qayyum Commission as the representative kind of opening section of that last section. I struggled with it, but I thought ultimately that showed something. There was something in that, in how the biggest names had been kind of colored, in how politics became involved in it, in how it captured such a huge thing about Pakistan. I felt that it represented something of the modern age of Pakistan cricket, more than maybe any match. I had thought of maybe doing the 99 World Cup final as the representative match, but it just didn't strike me as the right kind of thing. So it was difficult, and people will argue that it's too, that last section is probably two eras. But one, the challenge of it being such a modern thing had to be resolved somehow, and it's still developing. Something like Amir is still a developing story essentially, who is in there. So I had to pick out, the themes of what has happened in this last era. You have captaincy, you have PCB administration. I think that's had a big impact on the way the game is. Captaincy has had a big impact on how the game is. Fast bowling is also actually, even though Imran came in the mid 70s, the real fast bowling revolution, I think the fruits of that have been seen in the 90s, post 92. So fast bowling also fit more naturally into that last kind of section. And I think, at least in my mind, I kind of justify it that way. And people will argue, of course, that no, maybe you should have given more credence to guys like, story of people like Mohammad Zahid, for example, or even Wasim. Maybe more on Wasim, maybe guys like Inzi, Mushtaq Ahmed, Saqlain Mushtaq, Shahid Afridi, Shoaib Akhtar. There's no ending. But once you go down that route, then you're talking about maybe 20 different books on Pakistan cricket, not just the one.
Shoaib, you have anything?
Yeah, no, I think we're good on time also, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
So, tell us where we can buy the book, and
Yeah, okay.
and we'll end with that.
Okay, so the book is available in Liberty Books across Pakistan and other stores as well. I think Hyperstar was carrying copies. Other bookstores in Lahore have copies. So it's available in most bookstores in Pakistan. Urdu Digest has done a translation, an excerpt, so you can read it from there. And I'm hoping to get like a proper Urdu translation of it done at some point as well in the future. You can order it online outside of Pakistan. You can order it online off Amazon, Amazon India, Amazon UK, Flipkart if you're in India, and various other sites. Hopefully, it will be available soon in the UAE in like sort of hard copy as well. So yeah, it's out there. It's kind of available pretty much everywhere. And I will hopefully be in Pakistan in Feb to kind of do some further promotion on it.
Cool, you can take us off here.